morning, fellow recording nerds! It's Monday. It sucks! So let's have some fun instead and continue this series of painfully obvious things you should be well aware of before you even set foot in a recording studio, but somehow everybody misses this stuff! Today, we're going to talk about those terrors of timing, the murderers of the meter, the killers of the clock. That's right, today's episode is a super special on those primate cousins of ours that evolution forgot, the drummers. You know, I've never met a group of musicians who have advocated for replacement by artificial intelligence more than the drummers. These guys go out of their way to make every aspect of recording them difficult. Sure, every once in a blue moon, you can get someone who comes into the studio and can play with some skill and finesse, but those guys are about as rare as a sane person at a QAnon convention. Don't get me wrong. One of my main passions in life is recording drums. I absolutely love it. However, it is a dying art that few can pull off without resorting to sample replacement, especially in the metal genre. If you're a drummer who's looking to record in a studio, or if you just want to record at home, here's a handy list of 13 things to avoid that will make the whole experience so much easier. Now, before we get started, if you're an absolute beginner who can't tell an EQ from a compressor and you want to learn the basics, you can sign up for my 3-part 90-minute course on audio basics. It'll give you the foundation on which to build your mixing skills. And best of all, it won't cost you a dime. Link is in the description below. All right, you drummers and you guys who want to record drums, it is time to put down the bong and pay attention. Here's my list of common mistakes you can avoid. Number 1. Don't record pots and pans. If your drum set sounds like shit, guess what? They'll record like shit. Take a very good look at what you're calling drum skins. Are they dimpled? Do they look like the surface of the moon? Are they so worn out that they're held together by duct tape? Then it's time to replace them. Look, I understand drum heads cost money, but you knew this going in. The easiest way to get your kit into recording shape is to invest in a new set of skins. And if that means spending a couple of $100s, then so be it. Check your bearing edges while you're at it as well and give them a good cleaning too. Cracked cymbals? Don't bring them. Don't record them. Seriously, talk to the engineer and see if he has some cymbals in the studio, or borrow or even rent some. Now, I have seen a couple of situations where we've stacked some trash chinas together and they sounded really cool as a special effects cymbal, but for the most part, please make sure your kit is fully functional. And that means no cracked cymbals. No, really. Please do not bring in a total piece of shit drum set and expect the engineer to sprinkle magical fairy dust all over your kit to get it to sound good. You have to start with a good sounding instrument. And that means spending some money on it, you cheap motherfucker. Number 2, don't beat the shit out of your new skins before you actually get to record them. I had this exact argument with a drummer I was in a band with. We were all set to record and he ordered a new set of skins and they showed up about 2 weeks before we were set to go into the studio. So I told him, don't put these on until just before we go in. And his response was, well, fuck that, I'm gonna put them on now. How does this not fucking compute? What good are your new skins if you beat them to death before they're even anywhere near a microphone? This, my friends, is what you're up against. It's the new toy syndrome. I bought it, therefore I must play with it immediately. Let's be clear. The drummer will go out of his way to ruin a great recording before you even come close to hitting the record button. Don't beat the shit out of the new skins? Yeah, good luck with that. It's going to be about as easy as convincing a religious nut job to get vaccinated. Unfortunately, there is no easy solution to this problem other than not buying new skins till a day or two before your session. But then you run the risk of your local music shop not having the correct drum heads. Happens a lot here in Windsor. It's definitely a problem I've run into before. Look, nobody ever said this was going to be easy. Number 3, don't sit too low. Even if your kit has been reskinned, it's tuned well, and is sounding great, if you're playing a lot of double bass runs and sitting too low, you're going to have a hell of a time doing it for any sustained amount in the studio. But this guy from this band sits low and he's amazing. Yes, and he's also a professional musician that does this for a living. He plays drums all day, every day. You stamp cans 9 hours a day for a living. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I worked on an assembly line for 27 years. I get it. You play when you can. So why not make it easier? Move your seat up higher and play down at your kit so you'll have gravity on your side. One of the absolute best setups I've ever seen come into the studio was Jan Sarenpuff from The Crown came in. We put books underneath his drum throne to get it up even higher. The thing is, with the throne at that height, the kit was so easy to play, even I could do double bass runs, and I am the worst drummer on earth. Number 4, don't hang your toms vertically. Once again, this all has to do with setting your kit up correctly. If your toms are hanging vertically, you're just not going to be able to put any energy into them, as you'll be delivering a glancing blow instead of putting the full force of the stick into it. The end result will not be the cannon sound that you're looking for. The drums will sound closer to Kentucky Fried Chicken buckets. As mentioned before, if your seat is higher, hitting the toms properly becomes much easier, as you can really lay into them, as you'll be hitting them at the correct angle. Number 5, don't crowd your cymbals. Simply put, the more you break your kit up, the better it will sound. Don't have your crash cymbals set up 2 inches off the toms. Get them up as high as you can handle comfortably. Same with your ride. Get it as far away from your floor tom as you can handle. The cymbals are competing with the mics on the shells, and the shells should get the priority. They're the elements that drive the beat, which is the backbone of your music. Cymbals, of course, are very important for accents, but your priority should be given to the kick, the snare, and the toms. The more you space things apart, the less bleed there will be into those close mics, and your drums will ultimately sound better because of it. Now, this point is especially important for the snare and the hi-hat. I've seen far too many drummers come in with their hats just millimeters off the snare and think that's perfectly fine for recording. The more you space the two apart, the better each element will sound. But Simon Phillips plays with his hats really close. Yes, that's because Simon Phillips is a world-class session drummer. He can set his kit up the way how he likes because he understands what the word finesse is. You've only recently realized that you don't have to fling your feces at your fellow apes to get your point across. And besides, pro-level session musicians don't complain if the engineer asks them to make a few adjustments to their kit. They just do their fucking job. Number 6, don't flam your kick and snare. Please, try to have your kick and snare hit at the same time, especially on the double bass runs. And if you're playing 16th notes on the kick, try to play 16 notes, not 15 like I've seen so many of you guys do. I don't know how many times I've been looking at some of the drum recordings I've done in here, and I'm like, what the fuck am I looking at? It's like, do you guys not fucking count? Of course not. Otherwise, your fills would end on beat 4 and not beat 3 2/3 every single time. I swear, if we were still recording to tape, most of you drummers out there just simply wouldn't be able to cut it. Number 7, don't hit with your purse. This is a favorite quote of a roadie friend of mine who would critique a rather famous drummer from a huge metal band. Drummer would come up, how'd I do tonight? And reply would be, well, would have sounded better if you didn't hit the drums with your purse. Now, I'm not saying what band it was, but I guarantee you have listened to them. The point being is if you hit your drums with a feather, they will sound like it. And I am not saying hit like a girl is a bad thing, because one of the hardest hitters I've ever seen was this little 90-pound pixie from a band called Courage My Love. I was at a show where they were headlining, and when they had hit the stage, I grabbed every single drummer I could find in the venue, dragged them over, and pointed to her. See? That's how you hit a fucking drum set, with power. Male, female, in between, it doesn't fucking matter. Drums sound better when you put energy into them. Wind up and fucking hit them. And play steady rim shots while you're at it on the snare. I'll explain why in a minute. Number 8, don't kill your cymbals. Unfortunately, most drummers do the exact opposite of what's needed in the studio. Beat the shit out of the cymbals, then hit the skins like a wimp. Let me be clear here. What we want is heavy on the shells, light on the cymbals. Just because the hi-hat is the loudest thing on your drum set does not mean you should be hitting it as hard as you possibly can. This is where we want the drummer to exercise the skill that seems to be ever so elusive: finesse. Don't just bash through a crash cymbal. They don't sound as nice when you do this. Instead, take a Karate Kid wax on, wax off approach and paint circles instead. Because if you hit the cymbals with a glancing blow, they'll sound softer, sweeter, and more pleasant to the ears. And unlike the shells, you don't need to put a lot of energy into them for them to be heard. Now, of course, the biggest issue recording engineers face when working with drums is the hi-hat. It has a tendency to bleed into all the drum mics, but especially the snare mic. And this could be a total nightmare to deal with at mixdown time, because if the drummer hits the hats too hard, you wind up turning up the hi-hat instead of the snare when you turn up the snare mic. Sure, you can filter it and gate it, but there is just no substitute for having a great source. And that means heavy on the snare, light on the hats. And close them up, for fuck's sakes! We're doing metal, not a disco record! You don't need them wide open, smashing away. A little opening is all you need, and the hats will sound quieter because of it. Your snare will sound better because of it. Number 9, don't set your snare too low. Simply put, if your snare is too low, you can't play steady rim shots. And that's kind of really fucking important when recording metal for 2 reasons. 1, it'll sound better. The snare will have more attack as opposed to just playing the skin, which will sound dull. And number 2, it'll be louder. With the snare being louder, that means less gain on the snare mic, which in turn means it'll pick up less of the hi-hat, which ultimately means we've got more to work with when it comes time to mix the drums. We can compress harder, we can EQ harder, and it'll just sound better. I can't stress how important it is to deal with hi-hat bleed during the tracking phase as opposed to trying to fix it in a mix situation. Because many times the only option is to replace it with a sample of a much more talented drummer than you hitting the snare. Believe it or not, this is not some weird sound guy conspiracy to make your life hell. Ultimately, we're trying to get the best sound possible out of you and make sure it's ultimately you performing on your own record. Number 10, don't come in unpracticed to a metronome. I have never seen a session grind to a halt faster than the time the guitar player said, "I want this drummer to play to a click." So we set up the click track and proceeded to watch the drummer fail harder than Kathleen Kennedy trying to create an interesting Star Wars movie. Once we turned the click off, things proceeded to rock out once again and the project was back on track. So what I learned from this, that the studio is not the right place to learn how to play to a click track. This is something that needs to be practiced at home on your own time. And I've lost count of how many times bands have responded to the question, "Where are your tempo maps?" with, "Well, our songs have changing tempos." And like creating a tempo that accurately maps out the changes is somehow mission fucking impossible? Why the fuck is it that musicians can show off just how amazing they can shred on their guitars, yet fold like a fucking house of cards the minute you ask them to write out a tempo map? It's not like this shit is difficult. Seriously, go get a fucking copy of Reaper, or if you already have it, hit that still evaluating button like you always do and map out your fucking tempos. Play along with it and figure out what bar it's supposed to change at. Add a new tempo point with the required information. People, this is not difficult. Time signature chain, same thing. Clap it out, figure out where it's supposed to be. Come to think of it, maybe I should do a dedicated episode on this because I've worked with guitar players that teach music for a living and still couldn't figure out that the time signature was changing on their own music. And if a guitar player can't figure it out, there is no way in hell a drummer's ever going to manage it. Number 11, don't play beyond your abilities. If you've just done 19 takes on a specific drum fill and still can't seem to get it right, maybe it's time to acknowledge that you might just not be as good as you're trying to convince everyone around you that you are. I'd much rather listen to a drummer with a great sense of feel, timing, and finesse than a semi-evolved simian blowing his load all over the place every 4 bars. Because that shit does not impress anybody! Especially the rest of your band who are paying the studio an hourly rate to watch you fuck your way up through your performances. Sure, once upon a time, bands had budgets of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Guess what? Those budgets disappeared exactly the same time that Napster showed up. You simply cannot afford to show up to the studio unprepared, not with the limited budget that your band has. Maybe nobody ever says this at your band practice, but it is really not just all about you. Respect the people you're working with and the financial commitment that they put into this project, and stop wasting their money by attempting to be the next Neil fucking Peart. Know your limitations and work within those, because there's no shame in that. Number 12, don't insist on recording your broken down piece of shit drum set. Simply put, if the studio you're going to be working at has a high quality drum set in great condition, use that! Nobody but you gives a fuck that it's not your kit. Not the people who are not going to buy your CD, not the people who won't come to your show, and certainly not the other bands and their girlfriends. Oh, but the kit is configured slightly differently from yours? I don't know, maybe try adjusting a couple of things? Then again, maybe not, because it's probably set up correctly for recording. So instead of whining about it being slightly different, try taking notes instead. Oh, hang on a second. A drummer capable of reading and writing? Yeah, like that'll happen. Number 13, don't assume the engineer is going to fix your crappy playing. Seems like a giant problem with a lot of drummers these days is that they phone in a half-assed performance and expect the recording engineer to pick up the slack. Now, I've always been very clear about this with my clients. I want the audience to hear the drummer, not my editing. Whatever happened to taking pride in what you do? Look, recordings are complex, but if you half-ass your performance, the end result will never, ever be great. You'll be doomed to mediocrity. You want to make something awesome? Then play something awesome. And if I do wind up fixing your shitty playing, you're never going to be able to pull it off live. And your parents, because they're the only ones who showed up to the gig, will be sorely disappointed in you.